Okay, hello, everyone. This is a series of webinars that's been sponsored by the North Central Sustainable Agriculture and Research and Education. And so we're putting some of these webinars. They used to be live presentations in this format. And so I'll go through the presentation, and this link will be available for you, and then you can send questions later. Okay, so I am Marisol Berti. I'm a professor in the Department of Plant Sciences and main campus in Fargo, North Dakota State University. And I work on cover crops, forage crops, and cropping systems. So this presentation is a compilation of some information from the research on how to select a cover crop according to the cropping system, so to your cropping system. So the first thing you need to do if you're going to do cover crops, or and you know if you're really doing some, is to learn some more about cover crops, right? To know what their family belong to, what root system they have, are they winter hardy or not, are they warm or cool seasons, or what function do they perform in the ecosystem. Become familiar and learn. These webinars is a way to learn some of the things, because to make the decision of what to plant on your cropping system, you need to understand certain things about these cover crops. So cover crop classification, we can classify them by family, botanical family, legumes, cereals, brassicas, and other families. By the seasonal cycle, cool season or warm seasons, that's very important. And by ecosystem function. These are the functions that these different cover crops and different families do. And it's going to be related to the objectives of why or what you want the cover crops for, and I'll show that later. So the cover crops' most important families are the grasses, in which you know most of the crop, right? The cereals, rye, winter wheat, barley, oats, triticale, forage sorghum, also millet, brassicas, radish, turnips, canola, and legumes, okay? And so we have much more legumes than these ones, but crimson clover, winter pea, there's fava bean, there's many others. Now, root system is something very important because root systems do different things in the soil. We're interested in soil health. And so each types of family have different things that contribute to the soil. So the root system, we have a fibrous system, which is typical of the cereals. Like here, you can see a rye root, and it has a lot of the soil attached to it. While if you look at a radish or turnip on the right side, left side, you can see that there's no soil attached, and this is because cereals they have association with mycorrhizal fungi, which produce some glue-like substances that make the soil to glue to that root, and also improve soil aggregation. The root on the top is from an alfalfa root, and you can see those are those are roots. They have nodules that in symbiotic association with the plant fix atmospheric nitrogen, so they put nitrogen into the soil. So it's important to see that, and you can see the roots of the brassicas, turnips, and radish don't have soil attached, and it's because plants in this family are not mycorrhizal. Seasonal cycle is very important because it's going to depend when you can plant or cannot plant these crops, depending on your objective. Warm seasons, we have forage, sorghum, millet, teff, cowpea, of course, corn, soybean. Those are warm seasons. And warm seasons are crops that require temperature, so they cannot be planted too early in the season, and they are freeze as soon as the temperature reaches 32 Fahrenheit in the fall. Cool seasons, you know them, cereals, there's a lot of legumes, and brassicas. All the ones we use are all cool seasons. I don't know of any warm season brassica. Important to know them to see where you're going to feed them on your cropping system. So your cropping system and the questions on this cropping system is very important, right? What is your crop rotation? If you ask someone, well, what cover crops should I use? We need to know what crop you have before the cover crops and what crop is following your cover crops. The reason for this and why is this important is because residual herbicides, right? We need to know what crop you had before you're gonna plant cover crops and know where's your herbicide program, because if you have a residual herbicide, likely you might kill all your cover crop. So you need to know that. And I'm not going to talk much about that, but Dr. Mike Osley in the Carrington Research Extension Center, he did a webinar last week and it's available online at that link. And this will be available for you to see. And he did a presentation on herbicide residues and cover crops, what cover crops you can plant or not on herbicides used in corn and soybean. Then the other thing is important to know what cover crops or crop you have before and after is the seeding date, right? Because if you have a cereal before your cover crop, you have a lot more time to drill one. But if you have corn, you don't have that. Competition for water is important because some cover crops can drain the soil from water, and some certain toxicities some crops can produce through allelopathy to each other. Seeding dates is extremely important the time you plant. And I want to show this is some data. Every year we do this experiment just to show in the farmers the ability of the plants to grow planted with only 2 weeks difference. You see these were planted on July 27 and August 10, okay? I'm just showing the July 27, the blue lines, for plants on the grasses, plants on the brassicas, and plants on the legumes. Okay, so I don't think I have an arrow. All right, so what the important thing of this graph that I have here is you see I have the different families, grasses, brassicas, legumes, but within one of these ones, we have warm seasons, right, and cool season, like forage sorghum, foxtail millets are warm, and these ones are cool seasons. So if now I go ahead and I put the second date, you can see this is the biomass produced from planting right until the frost came on these crops. And you can see as forage sorghum, on only that difference between planting, you know, it's not even 15 days, the biomass production of the crop decreased on 77%. Okay, so that's the impact of the seeding date and the late summer and early fall. And this is why it's important if you're planting a cover crop for fall grazing, you really don't want sorghum or millet because you're going to produce very little, and I'll show you some pictures. In brassicas, even in the cool seasons, you also lose growth because for every day that you lose in August, you get less temperatures, you still lose the opportunity of growth. Even these plants are not going to get frosted right away like sorghum. They're still going to produce a lot less the later you plant them. But these are plants that you can plant in the fall, but you have to know that the sooner you plant right after the harvest of your cereal crop, the more yield you're going to have. Now you look here at the winter cereals, you can see that rye, for example, had actually higher yield on the second date, okay, because it's a cool season. And the same with legumes. You can see forage peas still reduce it, but not as much as the brassicas. And the hairy vetch actually increased in yield on the second day. So this is key for selecting a cover crop or a cover crop mix, especially when you're in the fall. This is for fall seeding, right after a cereal crop. So here are some of the pictures from that graph, right? This is how much this forage sorghum grew when planted at the end of July. This is how much it grew, right? This is a weed. This is the important one. You see, there's almost nothing. There's no cover. Doesn't even help with soil erosion here, let alone for grazing or anything. You're not getting any biomass by planting it August 10. You know, it's not, so this is pictures show that in foxtail millet, same thing. You see, planted at the end of July, versus planted August 10, look, there's almost nothing. You know, that dry stuff, these pictures were taken after the frost. So you can see this frost is the grass that is there. That's the grass. Well, pictures taken, all these pictures were taken at the same time. Forage shows you almost don't see a difference. And cereal rice, you see some difference, but it's mainly because cereal rice is a winter crop, and when you plant it too early, it tends to try to bolt, even if it doesn't, try to head, so it gets a little taller, while if you plant it later, it just behaves as a winter. You know, it's just a winter crop, so it's not going to produce tall biomass like oats. But the differences, as you saw in the graphic before, are not as much, but these differences are striking, right? You got 14 days of difference and you almost don't get any biomass. And the brassicas, you saw the graph too, their differences, right? Between one planted in July, one planted in August. Although these plants didn't freeze, you see this picture was taken after frost, and you see sorghum and millet are frozen, have been frozen, but these ones are still alive. But we have a difference. You can see in mustard or the brassicas, the one planted in July bolted and flowered, you know, and flower, and it has, while this one looks, it hasn't flowered yet. So there is a difference in that. And there is a difference in root growth, and that's what we're interested, right? We're trying to work on soil health. Brassicas are used for reducing compaction, or moving nutrients that, up from, tapping nutrients from deep in the soil up. And you can see in this case that this, you know, when you plant it a lot earlier, you have a huge root. So this root likely is going deeper than this root planted 2 weeks later. The same turnips, and then with radishes, you see you got a turnip here, and then you have a radish here, radish here. You don't see as much difference, but in turnip you can see the huge difference. So you have less above ground biomass by planting 2 weeks later, but also you have less root mass, which is what we're interested. So objectives are very important. Everyone that asks me or asks any of the researchers or extension people is, what cover crop should I use? The first thing we're gonna ask you is, what are your objectives? What do you want the cover crop for? Okay, what do you expect from the cover crop? Why do you want it for? Why do you want to have cover crops? And what do you want that cover crop to do for your soil, for your farm, for your operation, and your next crop? So you have to have certain objectives in mind so we can help you and guide you. We're not gonna give you a recipe of what it is. It's just like in these presentations, we're gonna tell you what are the alternatives that you can choose from. So crop sequence is gonna be very important, right? And especially because of the timing that you're gonna have to plant or not plant. So in North Dakota, in many parts, we have a wheat or a cereal, could be barley or oats, followed by soybean the following year, right? And that's just going to be one of the common sequences, and I'll show what possibilities of crops you have there. Then we have one that's corn to soybean, where things are a lot more complicated, or soybean to soybean, or soybean to corn, right? For people that grow corn soybean rotation, how we insert these cover crops into those mixes. Then we have cereal sugar beet, which is another rotation. Usually sugar beet in the Red River Valley is followed by after wheat. And so we want to see what options we have there, or in season. And then we have fall season grazing. That means it's called fall season grazing or cover crops, are really they're annual forages, that's what they are. And there's been a lot of use of these because of the prevented planted acres, so you can put some of these forages and graze it later. Last year, because of the conditions that were so wet, the deadline to be able to graze these was moved to September 1st, so a lot of farmers were able to graze it. Each year is on November 1st, unless the date changes. So we'll see what happens this year. They're going to change it. And for fall grazing, usually of something planted after cereal is where you're going to have different alternatives. So I made these diagrams in a little bit to try to simplify the different sequences and what you're going to do about it. So from cereal to soybean or corn, you kind of want to keep it especially from cereal to soybean, you want to keep it simple and cheap, right? Especially if you're not going to graze it, all your interest is soil health, keep it as simple and cheap as you can. Okay. This is not the only one, but winter rye is very important to have in the mix when you have soybean as the next crop, because if it's too wet in the spring, you need something to dry up the water so you can plant the soybean. Radish and flax are going to get winter killed, but they have another uses. So if I have wheat, I have time to drill. Drill is always better than aerial seeding or broadcasting on the surface. So if you have the time to drill, you drill. Those red shapes I have in there is just to show that if you don't have these cover crops in the fall, you're going to have losses of nitrates and phosphorus by runoff. While if you put those cover crops on top, then this is going to disappear, right? Whatever cover crop you have growing in August through November, it's going to avoid the losses of nitrogen and phosphorus in some erosion. But in the spring is when we are not wet, and when in the spring we get a dry spell, soils are not protected or covered by a cover crop, growing cover crop. They have a lot of erosion, and then if it rains, we have also nitrate and phosphorus losses. So we don't want that. So in this case, if we plant the winter rye will survive the winter and will provide that cover, so these problems will disappear, and we'll be able to plant our soybean. So some pictures here of a cereal and then soybean. So this is winter rye that was planted last fall after a cereal, or it could be after soybean if you have time. And then this soybean was planted onto green rye. Okay, rye you can terminate it before planting, or you can plant when it's green and then terminate it with Roundup. Okay, green planting takes a little more knowledge how to do it, but it works especially on wet springs because rye helps to dry the soil so you can get the soybeans earlier in the season. Now you have to watch this system, because if you're in a sandy soil, you're actually could get too much water out by the rye and cause a problem. And we've seen that on dry years. A crop like rye will dry the soil enough that it could cause a yield loss on your crop. So you have to watch for that. Mm-hmm. So soybean to soybean is the same thing. Some people are doing soybean to soybean, like you can see here, this crop is still standing. It was aerially seeded with rye. You can see rye in between the rows. Soybean hasn't been harvested yet, but that rye is going to provide a protection to the soil and to the nutrients not to be lost by erosion or by leaching. And once that soybean is harvested, then you're going to have that green cover there. Okay, so aerial seeding can be done right before leaf drop or somewhere in there, but I'll show more information about that. So this crop is a winter rye, is winter crop, will survive until next spring, and you can plant soybean again. And there are some people doing that. They put in an aerial seeded rye into standing soybean, and next year they plant soybean again. And here you can see the same thing. So cereal to corn, what is important is when you are doing cereal to corn, that means you cannot really use rye. The same as you're going to wheat, because some people use still rye before corn, but corn is very susceptible to rye for different reasons. It could be nitrogen tie-up, or it could be water problems, it could be allelopathy or toxins. So the best recommendation, if you have wheat this year and next year you're going to corn or wheat again, is don't have rye on your system and just have crops that winter kill. Like this is a barley flax rape. So this was planted after a cereal crop. And this is a radish, flax, turnip, fava bean, biostrips. That means a planting by strips. So the farmer next year is going to plant the corn where this strip is, okay? So that's what's called biostrip. It's gonna in that area where these radishes are concentrated and nutrients they're picking up from deep in the soil, now the farmer's going to plant it there. Now the corn to soybean, and it's a common sequence, is complicated because corn is too late. And some years, like last year, we didn't even get it, right? There's still a lot of fields with corn. Um, and so you can't really plant a cover crop after corn harvest because most years you're not going to have a season after corn harvest. So here is where a lot of the work on interseeding has been done. Interseeding or aerial seeding, it can be a cereal rye if you're going to follow it with soybean, or if you're going to follow with wheat or corn again, then you don't want cereal rye, you just want barley or radish. Okay, so interseeding can be done at the V6 stage. There's equipment developed, I'll show pictures to do that. And we've done a lot of work trying to figure out how to do this and what works and what doesn't. And then the other possibility is aerial seeding or broadcasting in the R4, R6, I mean, late in the season, okay? In September, October, we really don't have time because the corn is still gonna be there. So the idea of this interseeding or aerial seeding and standing corn is to establish a cover crop while growing corn. So when I take the corn off, then this crop is already there, okay? If I don't put anything, I'm going to have losses of nitrate and phosphorus in the soil because I don't have any green cover taking them up. Even I have corn residue, I don't have a green cover, green roots moving the nutrients. So if I put radish in a cereal, then I'm going to get rid of that. And then next spring, I'm going to have a living crop like rye, if it's a winter crop. And then I go to soybean. So here are some pictures of what we did in our project. And this is a larger, it was a 100-acre field that it was interseeded with a special equipment was developed for that, which is this one. And that one is a twin row, separated 6 inches on the 30-inch center rows that can plant those 2 rows of cover crops. I'll show more pictures. Also, you can use some of these Hagee sprayers modified for seeds, and it works. This one works, but the disadvantage of this system is the seed is just placed in the soil. There's no incorporation. There's no really planting. It's I would call it an inline or in-row broadcasting. It's better than aerial because the seeds don't get caught on the crop. They go directly to the soil, but they're still on top of the surface. And these systems, they're broadcasting or aerial, have the disadvantage of that you cannot use cover crops with large seed. You couldn't do peas, you couldn't do fava beans, soybeans, nothing with a large seed can be done on these systems. While with this interseeder, this is a planter, so you can put any size crop. You're planting. Here you see some different plants that we've tried. We've tried all different species to see what grows. Now, the canopy under the corn, it has only like 15% of light. And at some times of the year, it's 10% of light. So when you're putting this at V6, the plant is already about, taking 70% of the light, so it's only 30% left. By the time these plants start coming out of the soil, there's almost no light. So you see they grow really kind of spindly for the lack of light, okay? And then later in the season, you see these here. Now, the idea is that when you harvest these plants are gonna get light and be able to grow. But what we observe that is there is a huge difference on shade tolerance on these plants, okay? Some plants can tolerate this being a couple months without light, but some don't do very good. This is another planting within about 100 acres. This is winter rye with radish. In the season, this is what it was planted with that equipment I showed before, with a twin row seeder, right? You can see that the rye and the radish, they look spindly and yellow. And this one had camelina too. And you can see camelina on this other one. And then when this corn was harvested, this is what it looked. And we were really happy. This was in 2016. You see there's rye, there's radish. You could graze these. There's a lot of forage there together with the fiber of the corn. And so we're happy to see this, but this doesn't happen every year. Like last year, this wouldn't happen because the corn was never off. So the cover crops, even if they were there, they never got a chance to grow. Okay. And then in the winter, this is what you want to see, because you could still graze cattle in the winter and get all that green stuff that isn't there, right? But we wish this is what we would want every year, but this in corn doesn't happen every year. There's so many years where corn gets really late, like last year, and we don't get to harvest it, so cover crops are not going to grow very well. Soybean to soybean is a similar story, except that you have a little more time than in corn. Usually it comes off a couple weeks before. You can do interseeding at V6, but I'll show you really all the work we've done. When you interseed in soybean too early, all the crops under the canopy die. And the reason is, in soybean, even it's a lot shorter crop, but it's a broadleaf. So because it's a broadleaf, there's no light going through the canopy. So there's barely 5% of light under the canopy. It's very dark in there. We just don't go under the canopy, so we don't know, but there's no light for a crop to grow. So what we've tried and what really has worked is more of a aerial seeding, a leaf drop or broadcasting, where the cover crop is not subjected to a really long period of shade. Also, all these interseeding systems and rainfall, we're rain-fed systems, so the success that we get on doing this depends on rainfall. If we plant this here and we get a nice rainfall, all those cover crops are going to come. If you plant here and there's 2 weeks with no rainfall, we're not going to lose it. Or sometimes we get some rainfall, but it's so little that the plant germinate and then they die. So we're so dependent on rainfall because it's a broadcaster. That's what's the idea of doing this V6, right? Because we can put it on the soil. But in soybean really doesn't work. So the same concept, if you are able to put something interseeded ahead, by the time you harvest the soybean, you're already going to have a crop there. And in soybean, if you use an early maturing variety, you might even be able to drill the rye right after the soybean. Okay, and if you do that, then you can have a crop. And so rye can be planted later, can be planted in September. So if you have a winter rye, you're going to have a rye come back in the spring and take the moisture and nutrients that we should lose. And also I want to show you, you can do this also with winter camelina because it's also very winter hardy. And here you see this been broadcasted over in soybean, standing soybean is already there. So when I have this soybean, I got a green cover, right? A green cover. And then next year I'll plant soybeans and I'll show you a different system that we have, we call relay cropping, where we actually, next year, we plant the soybeans into the green camelina before it bolts in the spring. And then the soybean starts growing while the camelina is still in there. Then camelina is an oil seed of very high quality. So you could get that crop and make some money if we have a market. We don't really have a good market yet, but it's a good possibility because then you get two crops. Once you harvest a camelina, then the soybean keeps growing. And here I want to show you there's a farmer in North Dakota that actually did this. So, and so he had soybean last year. He harvested the soybean and drilled this winter camelina. This is a 74-acre field. He's planted the camelina in the fall with a twin row seeder. And in the spring, when camelina was still very short, he planted with a twin row, planted again twin rows of soybean in between. Okay, it's hard to see here the rows. And this is a flowering time. Then when the camelina dries and is ready to harvest, you can see there the row of soybean that's growing under, right? And I took this picture right before the farmer harvested. And when the farmer harvested that, then the camelina is then harvested and then the soybean gets to grow and produce grain. So you get, that's why it's called relay cropping, because you get two crops in the season, Okay, you get the now the farmer had he adapted his harvester, so it had like a piece of tile drain, a plastic, where the soybean rows were, to avoid cutting too much green foliage of the soybean when he was harvesting camelina. The yields, of the soybean were about 75% or would have been if you would have soybean alone. So you will have a yield rack, but then you have camelina too. So if camelina can have a good price, then you have two crops. Okay, moving on. Like I said, we've done a lot of things with interseeding cover crops into soybean in R6. And here you see camelina again. We're doing some work on camelina as reducing the soybean cyst nematode. In the greenhouse, we've seen that camelina can reduce the soybean cyst nematode, but when we did this in the field, it was very hard to get response because of the variability. But this is what, when you harvest, and here we try different crops, we try peas. You see here the peas are super damaged by the shade. But when the variety of soybean was harvested, then you see these peas in the row here, okay? So it is possible to do it, but you have to have an early maturing variety, so it lets the cover crop to have light as soon as possible. And like I said before, this works better in R6 than V6 or R4. So this is what I was saying, right? If we have cover crops now for soybean to corn or wheat, I mentioned the corn. This is about the same as we mentioned before. You could have an interseeding, but we don't really recommend the V6, V8. We've seen in soybean doesn't work. We can do an aerial seeding, or we can do, go the other way. Or we can, but in this case, we want to have crops that they winter kill, like barley and radish. Or you can use winter camelina. Winter camelina does not have the problems that rye has before wheat and corn. You don't want to have rye before wheat because of contamination. If you get some plants to go to head, you're going to have your wheat contaminated with rye seeds. And in corn, there's some allelopathy, and wheat there is some too. So if you have rye before wheat, you might have a reduction in yield. But at least if you have cover crops that get winter kill, like the little picture says there, you have a cover in the soil, okay, that are in the spring. It's not gonna move water if it's too wet, but at least it's gonna protect it from soil erosion. So all this research on interseeding, if we do a summary, really the successful establishment with interseeding or aerial seeding really depends largely on rainfall. If you get a nice rainfall after you interseed or aerially seed, then you get a cover crop. If you don't get rain for 2 weeks, you don't get a cover crop and waste your seed. Now, in the real one, interseeded, you got better chance because you got a soil to seed contact of getting established. But if you seed too early, then the shade can kill your cover crops. Now, cover crops have different tolerance to shade. Of the ones we've used on the experiment, cereal rye is the one that has the most tolerance to shade. And then oat and barley, and then red clover, hay vetch. Pea and fava bean have horrible tolerance to shade, and brassicas don't do well at all. Okay, depends the year. You got really good moisture, but radish, turnips don't do very well in shade. So if you want to drill them after the crop, that's when you want to use them. But interseeding, when we started this project, we thought interseeding was a much better solution, but we didn't realize that the competition for light is too great. So it really doesn't work too much. Now, with the interest on 60-inch corn, there's a lot of people are going to start doing this now. And in 60-inch corn, now you're going to have light. So it's going to be a completely different system. And that'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Interseeding in soybean, it has to be very late because early doesn't work at all. And corn works something. Another work that my colleagues did, I'm part of this project, but I didn't do it. Dr. Chatterjee in soil fertility, he's working in sugar beet, in cover crops in sugar beet. This is some of slides from his student Sailesh. And the concept here was a little bit different than the other cover crops. In sugar beet, since we're not producing grain, the green foliage of the cover crop is not going to cause a problem with harvest. But in sugar beet is a crop where we have tremendous soil erosion in the spring and in the fall, because when the harvester takes the roots and then the soil still, there's nothing to hold the soil. And also we have problems with nitrate, a lot of leaching nitrates. Sugar beets are fertilized with high amounts of nitrates. And the problem is when this nitrate moves too deep in the soil, it actually produces a reduction in sugar content if the plant has too much nitrogen. So here the cover crops have a little bit of a different objective other than soil erosion and nutrient losses. Actually, taking up some of that excess nitrate can help the sugar beet quality. And so the questions really were, can we interseed these crops? We try different crops. And when we interseed these crops, can we do this to protect the soil without compromising yield, right? We don't want to reduce sugar beet yield or quality. And so we don't know. This is something, I think we're the first one, and NDSU, Dr. Charity, start this type of research to see if this is something we could do. It was a very interesting research. We tried rye, winter camelina, winter shrimp, mustard, interseeded at 2 different planting dates, and this has been done 2 years in a row. One in June and one in July. Those are the same dates and those years. The results are changing every year, but these pictures show you the interest of what we really want to do. This is what the soil looks like after we harvest the sugar beet and we don't have a cover crop growing in the spring. This picture was taken in the spring. You see where this rye was planted last year in between there's still, even the harvester went through, the middle of the row was not disturbed. So you still have that rye in there. So that rye is holding into the soil. Somebody said, well, how am I going to plant on that, right? That's going to be a problem. But there's a lot of things we have to deal with. But having that crop there, you're reducing soil erosion and you're moving water out of the soil for whatever next crop it is. So the results show that by interseeding these cover crops, right, each one, the biomass yield here, this is the biomass yield of the cover crops. So rye has the most biomass yield in the fall, in the spring, okay? And camelina has the least, and we know that camelina forms a rosette, produces very little foliage, but it produces cover, kind of grows sideways. And then these are the June and July biomass yield, right? So there was an effect of date across all the species. Of course, those interseeded later produce less biomass. Now, what was interesting on this was what happened with root yield and quality. In 2018, actually the highest yield, significantly higher than the control here, than at least 2 of the other cover crops, was, you see, mustard had a higher value. Although if you look at the letters, they're not really significant. But you can see that at least we didn't get a loss on yield by having these cover crops in between. What is really interesting is the sugar content. The crop significantly, although you see here a difference of not too much, but in sugar, the sugar content, only 1% of increase in sugar content can signify about $80 per ton, $80 per acre of gaining. So a 1% difference is significant in sugar beet. We didn't get quite 1% difference, but you can see the highest sugar content on these, and significantly different than control, were on those they had cover crops in it. Okay, and so what we're thinking is happening, we're moving some of the nitrogen away from the sugar beet, and excess nitrate reduces the sugar content, so we're moving it away. Now, the year after this, the student did this again, and the results were different, especially about 2019. Everyone knows it was a very difficult season, very unusually cold. And here what happened is the cover crops actually did reduce yield, okay? Not all of them, but especially those planted in June, reduced root yield compared to the control significantly. The conditions weren't there, so the crops actually grew faster than the sugar beet did, and so they caused root yield. Now, when they was planted in July, actually the one with cover crops had slightly higher, although not significant than the control yield. So in July, it didn't cause as much problem, but when planted in June, it did cause reduction, and we don't want to see that. And in the sugar content, we couldn't observe the same exact responses last year, although there was a trend to show something similar, that the roots with cover crops, where we have cover crops, did have a higher sugar content. Although statistically, because of the variation wasn't significant, we could see there were some interesting things. But when we have a crop like planted in July, actually was a lot lower. Now, one thing that could happen too, you have lower yield, right? We had that where we had a winter rye, we also had lower yield. When you have lower yield, you tend to concentrate sugar in the roots. So it might be just a concentration result. So the summary is, and they're gonna do this year again, okay? Because it's an interesting thing to do, because we can get a cover in the soil, and then if we don't reduce yield and can increase sugar, that would be very important. So interseeding and selection of species is, you see there's difference depending what crops you have. I know this year they're gonna change some of the crops. I think they're gonna put flax, they're gonna put some other ones. They're trying different things. Early planting has better cover crop stem, but also in some years you could reduce root yield. The protection from the erosion, especially on the next spring, if you have a winter crop, is very interesting, and it's something that it would be very good for sugar beet growers. And that scavenging of nitrate, excess nitrate leading to increase of sugar content is a very important result. And if this can happen, it's something that people might want to do, because that's actually economical if you can increase your sugar content in 1%. So rye can be effective for control, and now, well, this has been done only in small plots, and some farmers are interested in trying a large acreage and see if they can protect their soil from erosion. And then grazing. Grazing, I'm really interested in that. I work in forages. I think cover crops provide nutritious, forage, especially in mixes. Now, how to do these mixes depends of pretty much when you're planting, when you're doing, and what are you doing, okay? It's very variable and depends on the farmer, the type of animal, what are you doing. So before I go into this, I wanted to show just this graph to show you, and this is for any forage, whether it's a mix, whatever. As the dry matter yield of a forage goes up, that means as it matures, right, the quality goes up. And that's for any plant, okay? The more mature the plant, the less the forage quality is going to be. And this is gonna work when, and the mix is the same thing, okay? So what is forage quality or nutritive value? It really is not depending on the composition of the plant so much, but in the animal performance. So that's my cow, can my cow increase in weight if I feed them this or that forage? So there's different things that you're gonna hear when you talk about these annual forages or cover crops for grazing, right? And there are things that they're gonna give you, the forage quality depends on nutritive value or voluntary intake. You have to take the intake, right? You can have a forage with very, very high nutritive value. If the cow doesn't like it, doesn't eat it, it doesn't work, right? So we have the chemical compositions are important, the types of the fiber. There are different components here, fiber, protein. Protein is not the only thing is important in quality of forages. digestibility or energy content that we usually translate in something called total digestible nutrients, and other things. Retention time, so we have a forage that has so much water and very highly digestible like the brassicas, it go through the rumen and the system so fast that the nutrients are not useful. They're not used. Accessibility and acceptability are important, right? So the cover crops or forages you're going to use have to do a little bit with the animal requirements, and I'll show you very general. It changes with the type of animal. For a 1,200 pound cow with a calf, these are more or less the pounds of forage consumed per day and pounds of forage consumed per month. And then in the graphs, it shows the protein, right? We're about 3% protein, 3 pounds, no percent, 3 pounds of crude protein per day, right? If a cow consumes 35 pounds of forage a day, it needs a forage with about 8.5% crude protein. Now for total digestion nutrients, they need 17 pounds per day, and this is all dry matter. So at 35 pounds per day consumption, you need 48% TDN in the forage, okay? And I want you to remember this when I show you, these are the average crude protein and TDN values for these cover crops that we can grow them alone or we can mix them. If you notice, you remember here, put them on the side, these are the values that we have from the other slide, right? 8.5 protein and 48 TDN. If you look at these values, and these are things that we grow in North Dakota, the usual time that we raise them, and you see everything is higher than that. All the forages are higher than 8.5%, and all the forages are higher than the 48%. So this means that all these forages, doesn't matter alone or a mixture at the grazing time, they all meet the requirements of a 1,200 pound cow with a calf, which is what most farmers are trying to feed, okay? So a lot of people talk a lot about, oh no, I'm gonna add a lot of legumes because I need the quality. If it's beef cattle, you don't need that much more quality. The cover crops, all of them are reaching that. So we did an experiment trying to mix different cover crops mixes with a forage sorghum as a base, but also foxtail millet and pearl millet, and trying to see, and this was a little bit for preventive planting, what should we plant if we plant like sometime in June? Okay, what mixes of legume brassicas, warm season, cool seasons? Okay, what seeding rates should I use? What's the grazing window, and what happens with the shift and botanical composition? And this was really interesting on these crops. So we had 12 different mixtures. Mixtures 1 through 7 were a mix of grasses that you see the different forages or cover crops there. And mixture 8 to 12 were just a monoculture of sorghum, Sudan, or forage per millet. And it's 100% one of those. And here you can see yield. We had 2 cuts in the summer. This was planted the first week of June, right? And for the different mixtures, and you have them here, you can see that except for mixture 1 and 2, and I'll explain more about them, all the mixes, didn't matter what crop or how much seed they have, they're not different in yield to the monocultures of sorghum, or they're not different at all. Okay, and then the second cut, we had some that produced a little more and they regrew, but they still weren't significantly different. The only one it was different, it was one, which is an annual ryegrass-based mixture with chicory, plantain, and red clover. But like someone said, it's like the comparison wasn't fair, because really annual ryegrass is a crop that if you are gonna graze it, you should graze it every 15 days, right? So if we would have done that, we probably would have got almost as much as the other one. Annual ryegrass keeps growing as you graze it. So if you don't graze it, then it doesn't grow. So we use the same 2 cuts as for the other one. So it's a fair comparison, unfair comparison. Now the mixture 2 was more of trying to see for a fall seeded brassica mixture, so you have only 1 cut because it was planted in July, right? It was planted much later for production. But you can see that the production just planted later was over 1 ton per acre of these brassicas. Now, what is interesting on these is how the percentages of the grasses and the legumes and the brassicas changes with the cut. Okay, if you see here in general, all the mixtures they have sorghum or millet, you'll see that the sorghum and millet, one of them is dominating the mixture. Right here, millet is 69%, 12% is the forage sorghum. Okay, and the first cut here, forage sorghum is 42%. Here is 94%. Here, 38%. Now we cut it, and then the second cut, which came at the end of September, we shift to mainly these grasses, right? 59% now the sorghum, now the millet went down. So sorghum has the ability of regrow really fast after it's cut, and it takes over most of the mixtures. You see in the next one here, another thing that is important to know, because a lot of people like to put legumes into mixtures, is the legumes only survive at the beginning for the first cut. After the first cut, the legumes pretty much disappear from the mixture. You see here the red clover, it was low, but then disappeared. Okay, here we didn't have a legume. Here we have pea from 17% of the mixture, went down to 0. Fava bean went down to 0. Okay, so and you look in the other mixtures, the same thing. Legumes, once they get harvested, they don't have much regrowth power. So you won't have them much in the mix. But you shouldn't worry, right? Because I already showed you that the nutritive value of all these crops is still above of the requirement of cow. Now, the brassicas are the ones that do something the opposite, right? You see here the radish was 6%, now it's 21, right? So brassicas tend to grow more after they've been cut too. So they're gonna, and they like to grow in cooler season, so they're gonna regrow for the fall. So here is where we're starting to see those plants, and that's why we had this treatment planted in July, because these brassicas, we put both of them, and both of them about half and half of the mixture for the fall. So this study really shows it. And another thing I want to show you is the rates of sorghum are very, very low, right? 2 pounds per acre. Most of the recommendations go above 5 and even 10. And the problem is, if even with this low rate, you're still getting most of the mix of sorghum, if you put a lot more, that's all you're going to get. So you have to give a chance to the other species on your mixture. So you want to have a diversity of plants in your mixture. You have to reduce your sorghum or millet rate to give a chance to the legumes at least to be there for the first cut, to get a chance for the brassicas to be able to regrow for the second cut. You see in this treatment, everything pretty much is gone. Even the oats on the second cut is not very good. And the second cut, the VMR sorghum took over, and it's 80% of the mixture for the second cut. Okay, so we're gonna repeat that this year, and it's been an interesting study. So what we learned with this, the forage sorghum milling dominate the mix even at low rates. Okay, so keep that in mind. The forage sorghum regrows faster than any of the cover crops that we evaluated and dominating the mix for fall grazing. Forage sorghum yields about the same in mixtures or alone. So by putting more mixtures, you're not getting any more than the sorghum alone. So that's another reason not to put so much seed, right? You're not getting any more by reducing the seeding rate of sorghum. Legumes are usually gone after the first cut, so it's an interesting crop to have there to fix nitrogen, to increase protein, but that's going to work for the first cut. They're gone after that. Brassicas, they're usually going to tend to increase for fall grazing. So brassicas are highly digestible, and with the mix of the grasses you have in there, whether it's oats or sorghum or millet, then it's going to be a very good grazing mixture. Okay. So those are the things we learned with this, and also those mixtures where you don't put a sorghum, especially we're talking about fall season mixtures, if you don't put a sorghum or millet on your mixture, your yield is going to be a lot lower. So the sorghums and millets are giving the bulk of the yield to your mixture. You need forage, right? And they give a lot of the fiber, and the other components add to the quality. But if you want yield, you have to have these grow fast, crops that grow fast in the summer. And so this is a mixture also in a farmer's field. They had some grazing corn, and you can see radishes, and this one was like a 10-way mixture with those crops in there. This picture was taken right before it was grazing. This has a lot of forage. We calculate how like 2.5 tons per acre of forage or dry matter. Here you can see what happened with brassicas. Brassicas are really interesting because they're very frost tolerant, and this picture was taken really late in the season. They can survive to November, and even the cows can graze it and take them out of the snow. And so that's an interesting component for fall or winter grazing. And this cow is pretty happy, was hungry and is pretty happy. And so thank you for that. And thanks for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, you can send me an email and I'll try to answer them. Thanks so much.